Yo guys, welcome to the last lap. Don't forget to drop a lovely, juicy 5-star rating if you're watching on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Hope you enjoy, and let's get into it.
Should we talk about Mercedes then? Get off my chest.
Tell me how you really feel.
As much as it has worked in the past for Toto and Mercedes in that style, certainly right now it doesn't seem to be. Although George Russell podium, obviously, with Alonso's penalty. Big gap between George and Lewis this weekend. What did we make of that?
It got a little bit smaller during the race, but again, it was kind of because of that safety car. Like Hamilton, Lewis being obviously on the mediums after the restart. Strategy. Yeah, it benefited him a lot in terms of, being able to move past the Ferraris and stuff. But yeah, there was a little bit of, I think it was more just qualifying that's more of a concern if you're Lewis, really, right? Because obviously Saudi Arabia last year, the pace difference was, he's tested a lot of things, increased weight on the car in comparison to George, whatever. But this time it was just like actual pace.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this is going to be the season now where it's properly putting Lewis and George against each other. And to be fair as well, in the previous season, towards the end, that's where Lewis was very easily sort of beating George. And George was very close as well. It wasn't like he was half a second or whatever qualifying. The gap between them was very, very marginal. But yeah, it was a bit of a rarity, I think, on this one, especially with Lewis. And he said that he's not confident with the car. He's not really working to his to his style. And it's just been a lot on for Lewis, I think, actually, in terms of like this weekend. Obviously, you got his trainer, Angela, who's now going off to do her own thing. They've all been. We said on the live show earlier that they're all being totally brutally honest about everything in terms of like Toto saying if the car's not good in 3 years time, Lewis can feel free to go wherever he wants to, but then also Lewis coming out and saying I told them that the car isn't working and they haven't listened to me.
I told the car?
I knew you were someone else.
You're rubbish.
Just get quicker, fam. Jesus.
Saying that this isn't working, and then apparently the engineers ignored it. And you mentioned earlier as well that George sort of said after their Brazil win, it kind of like blinded them a little bit, thinking, "Oh no, we now have got a winning package."
It was like a false dawn. It almost set him on the wrong path.
It's a bit like Ricardo with Monza. Like it's it's a rarity. Like yes, you've won it on pure pace, but the car is only suited for that real specific track and that real specific conditions.
Yeah, hence why Lando was P2 as well. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I think it was more about ride heights about Brazil as well. Red Bull messed up their ride height.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a sprint weekend. They couldn't correct it.
Red Bull played a worldie there.
Yeah,
mind games. Look, we'll trick them into a win.
Trick them down the wrong path. It's all in Adrian Newey. He's 2 steps ahead.
Adrian Newey, man, come on, man. It's real mind games. But I think with Lewis and the gap between Russell at the moment, I feel like he's a bit checked out, a bit disillusioned, because he felt like, okay, look, if I'm going to do this, I'm a 7-time world champion. Please have me near the front. Fighting for wins, not fighting for P3, P4
I think
or whatever.
especially after the end of last season where he was actually fighting for wins.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's kind of like Ferrari syndrome of like you get to that point where everyone's like, okay, well, this is good. We just need that one final step. And then you move like 3 steps backwards again. That to me would be even more frustrating than just never being there.
Your expectations change with time and experience. Talk about YouTube, for example, right? The first time you hit 100 views on a video, it's like, oh, gas. And then like 1,000 views, oh, gas. And then 10,000. And then all of a sudden you go back to 100 and it's like,
what happened?
Your expectations have changed. And it's like what you expect, the minimum expectation. That's always going to be more difficult. I think Vettel talked about this in terms of like, he didn't want to just like he'd been winning championships and fighting at the front in his Ferrari years, and like the idea of just settling for being in the mid pack is so much more difficult to stomach, I think, when you're that championship you've won. And Lewis has like won more than anyone, and it's like I mean, looking at qualifying, and he was clearly not as comfortable. He was a 10th slower than George in Q1, fine, a 10th, about 2 tenths in Q2, and then about 4 tenths in Q3, so that gap grew.
Big gap.
And in the race, Lewis was behind George, seemingly on the stronger tyre. He was complaining about the hards, and he had the mediums on, and George had the hards on, and wasn't able to get past. I think we saw last year George can go pretty toe to toe with Lewis Hamilton. I think George Russell's proven that he's the real deal.
Yeah,
and
which we knew, we've known since even in Williams and stuff, and where the team was struggling so much, and that he was crying because he got a point, his first point with the team.
Yeah,
and obviously now it's quite regular now Williams are getting it. But it's just showing that like we kind of knew he was already going to be good. But it's exactly what you said of they've had the taste now of like of the better food, and now but you can't get back from that, and you don't want. It's basically like.
But now they're shopping at Iceland again.
Yeah, it's like I'm having fish and chips, and then I discover I can have salt and vinegar on it, and now I'm having to eat it without that, and it's like this tastes bland and boring. It's like, no,
unseasoned car.
Exactly that. But now you got the taste of it. You don't want to keep going for it. But I think that's where the conversation keeps coming up of like, oh, is Lewis going to retire? It's like, no, he's not going to retire.
He's just not happy.
He's just not happy with it, and that's why they need to work through it. So eventually they can get back to having salt and vinegar on their chips.
And listen, if he needs to tell them through the media, he's going to tell them through the media. Like, I'm not happy with it. I'm not comfortable with the car. Like, he's after his interview in qualifying, he was just saying, I'm not feeling at one with the car. I'm not really like he's on a blind date a little bit, and he's seen the girl, and he's like, I don't know, gone to the bathroom. Can get me out of
put
here.
pressure onto the actual guys back at the factory.
Nah, it's like that. Have you seen it on YouTube? It's like a series when people do like blind date, and there's a button in the middle.
Oh yeah,
and then when they're not happy, then you press it. Like, right,
Lewis is spamming the button. W14, get it out of here. But honestly, like. Is it obviously this is it's not Lewis's fault or Russell's fault that the car is where it is at the moment. Is it there's been a little bit of a technical arrogance with Mercedes. They've been on top for so long. They said we do it our way, and clearly they got it wrong with the W13, but they're still kind of stuck with that concept and carried on with that. Is there a problem there? They're not accepting that, okay, listen, we need to go back to the drawing board here and maybe accept that we need to be closer to the Red Bull concept, maybe, or even just go completely brand new.
They gambled. It didn't pay. I mean, Lewis has said in an interview after he's happy to finish fifth, which P8 qualifying, finishing fifth. Like, if you take away Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes as names, you think, you made up 3 places. But actually, like, this is Lewis Hamilton in a Mercedes. Like, it's crazy. And it's like, keeping that, we see it in all different types of sport. Like, domination never lasts forever. And to keep people motivated and people wanting to stay, you had like Eric Blondin, who moved from Mercedes to Aston Martin, lost a lot of personnel to Red Bull powertrains as well. Like, you feel like that challenge. Part of the reason Lewis left McLaren was because he saw that Mercedes opportunity as something to work on, and it ended up paying off for him. But part of that, I think, is because he wanted to do what Schumacher did at Ferrari and take the team and build it up. And that's exactly what he did.
It's the motivation to like win the championships, and I think like. I'm going to make a reference here to Ted Lasso, which is absolutely great. And basically,
as a non-football man.
As a non-football, no, it's great, isn't it? Look at me, I'm knowing football stuff. Well, in it, basically, they're talking about how they're happy to settle, like sort of 8th in the league. And the owner of the team is basically like, no, we should always be aiming for winning the Premier League. And that's I think that's the main thing with this. That's why I'm relating it to this is having that motivation and being like, yes, you can settle for like 5th or something, but no, you always want to be trying to win a race. What's the best way you can do it to capitalize on every situation?
Especially when you have been winning races.
Yeah, and you have that sometimes with these brief little moments, like we mentioned Monza before, both with Ricciardo and also Gasly as well, where the team on their day have capitalized to get the best of it, to try and get the best result, but rather you don't want to just be settling for like an 8th or something. And that's with like McLaren at the moment. They're just trying to even get points, let alone trying to even get onto a podium, unfortunately. I'm so sorry.